Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Chief diplomats of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan reaffirmed their resolve to rid the Korean Peninsula of nuclear weapons, easing concerns over a potential shift in U.S. policy. The three countries also made it clear in a joint statement that they reaffirmed their commitment to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Now, this gave reassurance to Seoul, particularly after Trump's comments referring to the North as a nuclear power, which raised concerns in South Korea, as they led to speculation that Washington could be shifting away from its focus on denuclearizing North Korea. Now, despite this unity, challenges remain in aligning diplomatic strategies. With North Korea rejecting talks, expanding its military capabilities, and deepening ties with Russia, questions arise about the effectiveness of sanctions and the future of diplomatic engagement. For a deeper discussion on this, we are joined in the studio by Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Welcome, Dr. Go.
Thanks for having me back.
And also joining us online is Dr. Nielsen Wright, head of the Japan and Korea's program at the Center for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge. Welcome.
Great to be with you again.
So let's start a discussion with Dr. Go. Following the trilateral meeting in Munich, diplomats from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo signed a trilateral statement, which emphasized stronger deterrence against North Korea's military activities. How do you assess the current state of extended deterrence that the U.S. provides to its allies, especially with the second Trump administration?
Well, the second Trump administration just started out. It has to be yet 1 month since its inauguration. So in a way, it's soon to tell what kind of change could be taking place in regards to the level of deterrence against North Korea. But then so far, the statements coming out of Washington has been helpful and optimistic, and especially the Trilateral meeting that took place in Munich last week. And I think I was there last week as well, and then I think the mood has been pretty positive about this gathering. And I think that there's a sense of relief in Seoul about the fact that there has finally been a high-level gathering between South Korean Foreign Minister and the newly appointed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And then all the right things came out in that statement, all the right buttons have been pushed. And I think it's a good thing that the United States government reaffirmed the position of not just the complete denuclearization of North Korea, but also as reaffirming the strong defense posture for South Korea. So in this case, no news is good news. So there has been no major change to statements and the coming out of Washington. Oftentimes, these kind of radical changes in the posture and the U.S. policy is what really rattles the shakes the allies. And we know that's what exactly happened with the European allies of the United States, especially Germany, and also as with Ukraine. So I think there's clearly a sense of relief here. Obviously, there are more details to emerge going down the road about what kind of policy the Trump administration is going to assume regarding North Korea, but then until then, we can, enjoy our sense of relief.
Right. So nothing big has changed
Exactly.
from the previous administration. What about you, Dr. John Nielsen Wright? The Biden administration and now the second Trump administration have both maintained a strong stance on North Korea's denuclearization. But given the apparent lack of progress, do you see the need for a potential shift in a diplomatic strategy, or is maintaining pressure the best course of action at this point?
Well, I agree with Dr. Go that I think what we've seen is when it comes to the relationship between the United States and its Northeast Asian allies, plus ça change, really. It's more of the same, continuity from the Biden administration. I think that's really important in terms of consolidating and supporting deterrence and sending a very clear signal to the North Koreans, particularly in light of the very abrupt changes in the relationship between the United States and its European partners over the war in Ukraine. Anything that would suggest that there was any diminution of the cooperation between Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo when it comes to confronting North Korea might embolden North Korea to feel that it has more latitude to test the limits of deterrence. So I think keeping that very strong position is really important. And it was very clear when Prime Minister Ishiba met with Donald Trump on February the 7th in Washington that the Japanese, for example, were very reassured by this reinforcement of cooperation between them and the United States, with an emphasis on the importance of complete denuclearization. Same is true for the conservative government of South Korea, and at a time when, of course, both South Korea and Japan are facing real domestic challenges, given the impeachment controversy in South Korea, given the fact that Prime Minister Ishiba runs a minority administration. Sending a very clear signal is important. And of course, we've seen under the leadership of Kim Jong-un so much advancement in North Korea's weapons technology, consolidating its nuclear program, introducing constitutional changes that really do challenge, I think, not just, of course, North Korea's immediate neighbors, but of course other countries, including potentially the United States, given the expansion in North Korea's long-range ballistic missile capabilities. And all of this has in the backdrop the question about Donald Trump's own personal interests, because while Dr. Go is right to emphasize, I think, Mark Rubio's, if you like, traditional approach, Donald Trump remains a very mercurial character, and we do not know at what point whether he will contemplate a shift in direction. We saw that during, of course, the presidential campaign, hinting at the possibility of negotiations with North Korea. So for now, I think maintaining that tough posture is really the most appropriate way forward in terms of regional and, in fact, global security.
Right, so keeping the current situation would be important. But despite keeping its official stance of the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, U.S. State Department has separately emphasized their openness to dialogue with North Korea following the foreign ministers' meeting. Dr. Go, what does this discrepancy suggest about the alignment between Seoul and Washington on North Korean policy?
Well, I think the South Korean government also essentially open to the idea of engaging dialogue with the North. In fact, that was the whole idea about unification of bonanza, and I think this is one of the very important proposals that the new administration put on the table when just inaugurated. I mean, if basically the policy said that if North Korea expresses a strong willingness to engage in dialogue, then, and also in denuclearization, then South Korea will be very open to assist North Korea economically and politically with assistance with a level of magnitude unseen before. So in that sense, I think the State Department's statement about reaffirming its principle of dialogue, it's not controversial in any case. I think it's more of a reaffirmation of a very basic principle of resolving any differences or crises that should take place in the Korean Peninsula peacefully rather than through military means. So in that sense, the message is reassuring. But on the other hand, you're exactly right. I think it's also the case that the U.S. government, where in this case the Secretary Rubio and then others in the National Security Team in the White House, they highlighted the need for denuclearization of North Korea. And this is something that the North Koreans right now lashing out against. So in a way, the U.S. government's homework is to somehow resolve this contradiction so that they can bring North Korea back to the negotiation table. But here, I think the devil is in the details, and there are no details yet. And also, we have to emphasize this fact that this ambiguity allows President Trump to engage in his favorite pastime, which is to have face-to-face meetings with leaders like Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin in this case. So I think for now, there will be ambiguity, a very calculated ambiguity on the part of the U.S. government, when the U.S. government is right now busy, in fact, very much engaged in resolving the ongoing war in Ukraine. So I think the North Korea will get the message, but on the other hand, the challenge is not so much about resolving this contradiction between denuclearization and dialogue, but much more about ensure that the North Korea has the patience, or at least to prevent North Koreans from running out of patience, waiting until the U.S. government finally has the wherewithal to focus again the Korean Peninsula. So it's about making time for the eventual dialogue in the future.
Right, because especially there's no details yet at this
Exactly.
point. Now, with the same context, North Korea has flatly dismissed denuclearization as a failed dream of the past, adding that it rejects Washington's action in the most resolute tone. But some experts are putting meaning to, whom these words came from, which was the regime's foreign ministry and not leader Kim Jong-un himself leaving room for potential negotiations. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, how do you read into this?
I think it's legitimate to raise that question about where the message is coming from in the case of North Korea. The rhetoric is undoubtedly very resolute, and speaking out strongly against the United States cooperation with its Northeast Asian allies is very much part of the North Korean playbook. It also, I think it's important to say that however strong the relationship now is between Moscow and Pyongyang as a result of the new strategic partnership announced last autumn between the two countries, the North Koreans will have to consider the possibility that if Donald Trump is successful in negotiating with President Putin to find a way out of the predicament in Ukraine, some of the rationale for that close cooperative relationship between the Russians and the North Koreans may diminish. It is, I think, also fair to say that the wild card in all of this is, again, to echo the point I made earlier, President Trump and his willingness to contemplate some negotiations. The North Koreans are not about to give up their nuclear asset. That's been very clear from all of their public statements. And I think they're taking, if you like, a maximalist position. In fact, both sides, if you like, are taking a maximalist position, both the US and North Korea, ahead of any possible opening that might lead to further negotiations. And in that, I think it's perhaps worth noting that a lot of the fierce denunciation coming out of Pyongyang has not mentioned Donald Trump specifically in any context. And that's true of the foreign ministry language. And of course, we've not heard anything from Kim Jong-un himself or other senior members of his administration, including his sister. So I think there is room and there is a possibility, should Donald Trump have the bandwidth to re-engage with North Korea, given all of the foreign policy challenges he faces, not only, of course, the situation in Europe and the question of Ukraine, but of course the situation in the Middle East, his unprecedented statements talking about the possibility of rebuilding Gaza and the forcible removal of Palestinians from that territory. Strikingly, the North Koreans have been very critical of Donald Trump on that issue. And there are kind of wider issues about the type of disruptive nature of Donald Trump's leadership, challenging the very concept of state sovereignty, something which remains, of course, hugely important to the North Koreans as part of their own defense of their territorial and national interests.
Mm-hmm. So we can see that it's a strategic move for both leaders, not to mention the leaders, their reciprocate leaders, in their statements. So if Washington continues to kind of leave room for dialogue in their messages, what are the chances of a direct Washington-Pyongyang summit in the coming months or something?
I think there are hints of a possible opening. Lieutenant General Kellogg, the Trump administration special envoy for Russia and Ukraine, just said this Monday, in fact, that all issues are, in a sense, all global issues, security issues, will be open for interpretation, and that will include discussions with the Russians that might expand to include the question of North Korea and how best to deal with that question. So I think there is the scope for an expansion of negotiations. And of course, we saw, again, in the campaign, President Trump or candidate Trump talking about his ability to work with authoritarian leaders, including Kim Jong-un specifically. I think for the North Koreans, the question will really be trust and reliability. Donald Trump, of course, famously very transactional. And in the last Trump administration, despite all the progress that was reached between the two countries, failure of the Hanoi summit, I think left Kim Jong-un very much exposed. He'd invested a huge amount of political capital in meeting with Donald Trump in that context. Other issues, of course, which remain very, I think, critical will be the question of coordination between Donald Trump and the South Korean leadership. And of course, what we have to anticipate is the possibility in the wake of the impeachment controversy that we will see a general election in South Korea. If the polls are to be believed at the moment, the front runner for that is the leader of the Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, who has made it very clear, as have other members of the Democratic Party, about the possibility of opening up a new channel of dialogue with North Korea. South Korea's leverage in that context is perhaps open to question. But it may be that Donald Trump wants to wait until there is more political stability at home in Seoul before contemplating any possible discussions with North Korea.
Right. So actually resolving the situation, political turmoil in South Korea should be the first issue. But now moving on to weapons, Dr. Go, North Korea has reportedly deployed tactical surface-to-surface guided missiles to North Korea's long-range artillery positions and command facilities. How significant is this development, and what are they now capable of?
Well, this is more of an indication of their nuclear capability. So there's not much of a usefulness to deploying tactical surface missiles right next to their other weapon systems. Essentially, you want to disperse your weapon systems in case you experience a surprise attack. So, which is in fact the basic concept of kill chain that the United States and South Korea are trying to deploy. They have already deployed in this country. So essentially the idea is that you target the North Korean weapon system before they are able to launch and cause damage on the South Korean side. So what the North Koreans are doing now is, in a way counterintuitively, they're deploying tactical surface missiles. And then the reason why they are doing this is because they want to send a message, in my view. The key word here is that North Korean tactical, even though we call them tactical missiles, they are nuclear capable. So the idea is that they are essentially telegraphing this message to the South Korean and the Americans that they have deployed the tactical nuclear weapons near their weapon systems. So in case South Korea or the United States even dream about preempting potential offensive action on the part of North Koreans, for instance, by using the large artillery that are already targeting Seoul metropolitan area, then North Koreans are going to escalate from zero to all the way to the nuclear exchange. So this is the idea. Essentially, this is the idea that since they're going to use nuclear weapons from the very beginning of a conflict, so South Koreans and the United States shouldn't even dream about responding to any kind of provocation by North Koreans with force. So this is essentially a deterrence measure on the part of North Korea. And also, in addition to that, they want to dominate any kind of conflict that they might engage with the South and the United States, because they want to escalate the conflict all the way to the nuclear exchange. So in that sense, we don't know how credible this kind of posture is, but on the other hand, clearly it's an escalation on the form of nuclear posture on the part of North Korea, something that we should be concerned about.
So it seems to be a clear message coming from the regime. But meanwhile, Pyongyang's military cooperation with Moscow now continues to deepen. Daily NK says North Korea has recently dispatched a defense technology delegation to Russia to upgrade the regime's missile and radar technologies. And North Korea aims to establish a fully operational aircraft assembly line by the end of this year. And it seems like the cooperation is further helping the regime's weapons development. Dr. Nielsen Wright, how much should we be concerned about this?
I think we should be very concerned. There's no doubt that since last autumn, we've seen real progress in terms of Russia-North Korea relations, a deepening of ties, and exchange of personnel. And as you mentioned, lots of joint consultation about defense production, lots of unanswered questions about how far Russia is willing to go in terms of providing security and enhanced cooperation. One big question is, of course, the accuracy and range of North Korea's long-range missile capabilities, its desire to develop satellite technology, for example, that the Russians might be able to provide material assistance. And all of this, I think, comes back to the point that Dr. Go was making, I think, very persuasively, which is, as a means of ensuring that it can deter any risk of provocation from the US, South Korea, and Japan, North Korea wants to emphasize its military readiness. In all of this, I think, we also need to keep in mind the question of the danger of conflict through misperception, if you like, or excess confidence on the part of the North Korean leadership. And of course, the standoff between the two Koreas is a long-standing one, but there are areas of ambiguity, territorial ambiguity, for example, in around the northern limit line on the West Sea of Korea. In this context, I think if Kim Jong-un feels stronger and notices a degree of weakness in South Korea as a result of some of the political upheaval that's taken place, and sees his alignment with Moscow and Beijing and Tehran as giving him greater options, and also feels empowered to demonstrate to his own citizens that he is resolute and firm and very much in control, might he be emboldened to take action that would lead to the risk of rapid escalation given the enhancement of North Korea's missile capabilities and its stronger military posture. So I think we should take it very seriously, which of course is one reason why we've seen a continuation of joint military exercises between the US, South Korea and Japan. The recent visit by a nuclear-powered American submarine to Busan. All of this is further confirmation of the importance of demonstrating the resilience of trilateral cooperation.
Right, so it's a very concerning situation going on. But the UN has very strict sanctions on North Korea's trade. But Pyongyang seems to be continuing to find ways to circumvent them. Dr. Nielsen-Wright, how effective are these sanctions from the UN in their current form? And should the international community consider alternative approaches as well?
Well, I think if the benchmark, if you like, for the success of sanctions is the ability to retard North Korea's ability to enhance its military capabilities, then there are clearly limits to what they can achieve. I mean, they have declaratory power as a statement of the resolve of the international community. And at a time when Donald Trump is, if you like, tearing up the international rule book when it comes to alliance cooperation, particularly in the context of Europe, maintaining a unified approach on the sanctions issue, I think, is hugely important. It was quite striking at the Munich Security Summit that if you like, the foreign leaders of the G7 countries were quite emphatic in calling out North Korea and calling for comprehensive, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization. That's an important affirmation, reaffirmation of unity. But of course, there are also other issues in which the sanctions regime can be applied, which is, for example, addressing the question of human rights, another issue that surfaced in the trilateral meeting between Japan, South Korea, and the United States. But this, of course, is happening in a context where some of the mechanisms for applying the sanctions regime, not least the UN Security Council, have been weakened because of Russia's veto, of China's abstention, of the disbandment of the special expert group focusing on North Korea. And that brings us back to the question of what countries can do bilaterally or minilaterally when it comes to enforcing sanctions. I think the big problem at the moment is that the United States has departed in so many significant ways in the last few weeks from its support for international regimes, international cooperation, and that is a real source of concern.
So what could be done at this point?
Well, as Dr. Go mentioned, of course, opening the door to the possibility of negotiations with North Korea at some point will have to be considered, but it has to be done from a position of strength in which allies are reaffirming their commitment to protecting their own integrity and their territorial boundary borders. That will require coordination. And so far, the Trump administration has not shown itself as being particularly adept in that process of reassurance and coordination with all of its allies. That will take a global approach, and for that, the Europeans will need to be assured that they will be part of any further discussion.
Right, so more should be done. Sanctions alone may not be enough, and diplomatic engagement and strategic adjustments could be necessary moving forward. We had more questions, but I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Go.
Thank you.
And Dr. Nielsen-Wright, we appreciate it. And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time again as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.